The scream that shattered the silence of Mercy General Hospital at 3:47 a.m. on March 15, 1995, would echo through two families' lives for the next 18 years. But it wasn't the scream of childbirth that would haunt them. It was the scream that never came from night nurse Patricia Kellerman when she realized what she had done. In her exhausted delirium after a 14-hour shift, she had switched the pink hospital bracelets between two newborn girls, sending them home to the wrong lives entirely. The wealthy Montgomery family drove home in their silver Mercedes with a baby who should have been raised in a cramped apartment above a laundromat, while the struggling Torres family took the subway back to their one-bedroom flat, unknowingly carrying the heiress to a pharmaceutical fortune. 18 years later, Scarlett Montgomery stood in the marble foyer of her family's estate, her designer heels clicking against the imported Italian tile as she practiced her valedictorian speech for Westbridge Academy. Her voice was confident, polished, every word carefully enunciated as she spoke to her reflection in the massive mirror. "Excellence isn't inherited," she recited. "It's earned through dedication and—" Her words were interrupted by the housekeeper's gentle cough. "Miss Scarlett, your father wishes to see you in his study immediately." There was something different in Maria's voice, a tremor that made Scarlett's perfectly manicured fingers pause mid-gesture. Across the city, in a cramped apartment that smelled of her mother's night shift at the diner, Isabella Torres was bent over her laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard as she coded her way through another freelance project that would help pay for her community college tuition. Her dark hair fell in waves around her face, and despite the second-hand clothes and the exhaustion that came from working two jobs while maintaining a 4.0 GPA, there was an undeniable elegance in the way she moved, a grace that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her circumstances. When Scarlett entered her father's study, she found him standing by the window with his back to her, his shoulders rigid with tension she'd never seen before. Richard Montgomery had built his pharmaceutical empire on precision and control, but today his hands shook as he held a manila envelope. "Scarlett, sit down," he said without turning around, his voice barely above a whisper. "There's something your mother and I need to tell you, something that will change everything you think you know about yourself." The envelope contained DNA test results that had arrived that morning, results that confirmed what a private investigator had uncovered after months of following a trail that began with Patricia Kellerman's deathbed confession 3 weeks earlier. "You're not our biological daughter." Richard's words hit the room like a physical force, and Scarlett felt the world tilt on its axis. "But you are our daughter in every way that matters, and we love you more than—" But Scarlett was already running, her heels clattering against marble as she fled toward the front door, her perfect world crumbling with each step. Meanwhile, Isabella received a phone call that would split her life into before and after. She had just finished debugging a particularly difficult piece of code when her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. "Isabella Torres?" The voice belonged to Margaret Montgomery, Richard's wife, and it carried a weight that made Isabella's stomach clench. "My name is Margaret Montgomery, and I need to see you immediately. It's about your birth, about who you really are." Isabella's mother, Carmen Torres, who had been folding laundry at the kitchen table, looked up sharply when she heard the name Montgomery. Everyone in the city knew that name, knew the family that owned half the skyline. "What could they possibly want with you, Mija?" Carmen asked, but the fear in her eyes suggested she already suspected the answer. When Isabella met Margaret Montgomery at a quiet cafe downtown, the older woman's hands trembled as she slid a photograph across the table. It was a picture of a newborn baby with a hospital bracelet that read, "Torres." But the baby was clearly not Isabella. This baby had fair skin and light eyes, features that belonged to the girl who had grown up as Scarlett Montgomery. The revelation sent shockwaves through both families, but it was Isabella who handled the news with surprising composure. "I've always felt different," she admitted to Margaret, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "Not better or worse than my family, just different. Like I was homesick for a place I'd never been." Margaret Montgomery, who had always wondered why she felt such an inexplicable distance from the daughter she'd raised, found herself immediately drawn to this poised young woman who carried herself with an innate sophistication despite her humble circumstances. "You have your grandfather's eyes," Margaret whispered, referring to the Montgomery patriarch whose portrait hung in their foyer. "And his determination. He built our company from nothing, just like you've been building your future from nothing." But Scarlett Montgomery was not handling the revelation with the same grace. After days of refusing to leave her room, she finally emerged with a plan that was equal parts desperate and dangerous. She had spent hours researching Isabella Torres online, learning about her perfect grades, her coding skills, her reputation for integrity at the community college. "She's everything I'm supposed to be," Scarlett told her reflection, her voice bitter with resentment. "The real Montgomery daughter would never have needed tutors to pass calculus, would never have had to buy friends with expensive gifts, would never have felt like she was constantly acting in a play she didn't understand." The jealousy that consumed Scarlett was toxic and all-consuming, fed by years of insecurity that she had masked with designer clothes and her father's money. She began to formulate a plan to reclaim what she saw as her rightful place, a plan that would expose the depths of her desperation and ultimately lead to consequences she never anticipated. Isabella's first visit to the Montgomery estate was overwhelming in its opulence, but she moved through the rooms with a natural confidence that surprised everyone, including herself. She ran her fingers along the spines of first-edition books in the library, and immediately understood the organizational system. She knew instinctively which fork to use at dinner and felt comfortable making small talk with Richard's business associates, who stopped by unannounced. "It's like she's been living here her whole life," Margaret confided to her husband that night. "She fits in a way that Scarlett never quite." She couldn't finish the sentence, but Richard understood. They had both spent 18 years loving Scarlett fiercely while privately wondering why their daughter seemed to struggle with things that should have come naturally to someone raised in their world. Isabella, meanwhile, was experiencing her own internal conflict. The luxury was seductive, and she found herself imagining what her life might have been if she had grown up here, surrounded by books and opportunities instead of the constant stress of financial insecurity. The first face-to-face meeting between Scarlett and Isabella took place in the Montgomery library, and the tension was immediately palpable. Scarlett had dressed carefully for the encounter, choosing her most expensive outfit and ensuring her makeup was flawless, as if armor could protect her from the truth of the situation. Isabella arrived straight from her shift at the campus bookstore, her clothes simple but clean, her natural beauty requiring no enhancement. "So you're the girl who stole my life," Scarlett said without preamble, her voice dripping with venom. Isabella looked up from the book she had been examining, a first-edition copy of Jane Austen that she had picked up without thinking, and met Scarlett's gaze steadily. "I didn't steal anything," Isabella replied calmly. "I was a baby, just like you. Neither of us had any choice in what happened." But Scarlett was beyond reason, consumed by a rage that had been building since the moment she learned the truth. "You don't understand what it's like to discover that everything you thought you knew about yourself was a lie," she snarled. Isabella set down the book gently and stepped closer. "Actually, I understand exactly what that feels like," she said quietly. "The difference is, I'm not blaming you for it." The relationship between the Torres and Montgomery families became increasingly strained as the reality of the situation set in. Carmen Torres, who had worked 3 jobs to provide for Isabella and had sacrificed everything for her daughter's education, felt threatened by the pull of the Montgomery wealth. "They think they can just waltz in here and take you away from us," she said to Isabella one evening, her voice breaking with emotion. "They think their money means they deserve you more than we do." Isabella hugged her mother tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of her perfume mixed with the smell of coffee from the diner. "You raised me to be who I am, Mama," Isabella said firmly. "Money doesn't change that. They may have given me DNA, but you gave me character." But even as she said the words, Isabella couldn't deny the appeal of the opportunities that came with the Montgomery name: the chance to attend graduate school without crushing debt, the ability to pursue her dreams without working multiple jobs, the freedom to focus on her studies instead of survival. Richard Montgomery found himself in an impossible position, torn between the daughter he had raised and the daughter he had unknowingly lost. He arranged private meetings with Isabella, during which he discovered that she shared his analytical mind and his passion for problem-solving. "You understand business instinctively," he told her during one of their conversations. "The way you approached that coding project, the systematic thinking, the attention to detail, that's exactly how I built Montgomery Pharmaceuticals." Isabella found herself genuinely enjoying these conversations, feeling intellectually stimulated in a way that her current environment rarely provided. But she also saw the pain in Richard's eyes, the guilt he carried for the years he had missed with his biological daughter, and she felt the weight of responsibility that came with being the bridge between two broken families. Scarlett's behavior became increasingly erratic as she watched Isabella integrate seamlessly into the world that had always felt foreign to her. She began making anonymous calls to Isabella's employers, spreading rumors about her character and trying to sabotage her reputation. She hacked into Isabella's social media accounts and posted inappropriate content, hoping to damage her image with the Montgomery family. But her most destructive act was yet to come. During a family dinner at the Montgomery estate, where both families were present in an attempt to find a civilized path forward, Scarlett stood up abruptly and made an announcement that shocked everyone present. "Since everyone is so fascinated by Saint Isabella," she said, her voice shaking with rage, "maybe you should know that she's been stealing from the community college bookstore where she works. I have security footage that proves it." The accusation was a lie, fabricated with doctored video that Scarlett had paid a tech-savvy friend to create, but the damage was immediate and devastating. Isabella's face went white as she processed the accusation, and for a moment, the room was silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Carmen Torres stood up immediately, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "How dare you accuse my daughter of theft?" she said, her voice trembling with fury. "Isabella has never stolen anything in her life. She's worked for everything she has, unlike some people in this room." Margaret Montgomery looked mortified, while Richard's face darkened with anger directed at Scarlett. But it was Isabella who broke the tension with her response. She stood up slowly, her dignity intact despite the vicious attack. "I don't need to defend myself against false accusations," she said quietly, looking directly at Scarlett. "But I'm sorry for you, Scarlett. I'm sorry that your pain has made you so cruel that you would lie to hurt an innocent person. That's not the person your parents raised you to be, and it's certainly not the person you could choose to be." The aftermath of the dinner was explosive. Richard Montgomery was furious with Scarlett, not just for the false accusation but for the calculated cruelty behind it. "This behavior is unacceptable," he told her privately in his study after the other family had left. "I don't care how hurt or confused you are. Lying and trying to destroy another person's reputation is beneath you." But Scarlett was unrepentant, her jealousy having poisoned her completely. "You care more about her than you do about me," she screamed at him. "Your precious perfect daughter who fits in so naturally, who impresses you with her mind instead of embarrassing you at dinner parties. Well, congratulations, Dad, you finally have the daughter you always wanted." The words hung in the air like a poison, and Richard felt something break inside him. Not his love for Scarlett, that remained constant, but his ability to excuse her behavior in the name of understanding her pain. Isabella, meanwhile, was dealing with the aftermath of the false accusation at work and school. Although her supervisor at the bookstore quickly dismissed the doctored video as fake after reviewing the actual security footage, the rumor had spread throughout the campus. Isabella held her head high as she walked through the halls, but she felt the whispers following her, the suspicious glances from people who had heard only pieces of the story. It was during this difficult time that she made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. Instead of distancing herself from the Montgomery family to avoid further drama, she requested a private meeting with Scarlett. They met at a neutral location, a small cafe near the community college, and Isabella came prepared not for battle, but for conversation. "I want to understand why you hate me so much," Isabella said directly, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup for warmth. Scarlett had come prepared for another confrontation, but Isabella's directness caught her off guard. "You wouldn't understand," Scarlett replied defensively. "You've been perfect your whole life. Perfect grades, perfect character, perfect daughter." Isabella shook her head slowly. "I've never been perfect, Scarlett. I've made mistakes, struggled with insecurity, questioned my worth just like everyone else. The difference is that I had a mother who taught me that my value doesn't come from external validation." She paused, studying Scarlett's face carefully. "I think you're angry at the wrong person. You're angry at a situation neither of us created, but you're taking it out on me instead of dealing with your real feelings." For the first time since learning the truth about her birth, Scarlett felt her carefully constructed wall of anger begin to crack. "You don't know what it's like," she whispered, tears threatening to spill over. "To find out that everything you thought you knew about yourself was wrong. To realize that maybe the reason you never felt like you belonged was because you actually didn't belong." Isabella reached across the table and gently touched Scarlett's hand. "I do know what that feels like," she said softly. "But I also know that belonging isn't about DNA or money or growing up in the right house. Belonging is about being loved for who you are, not who you're supposed to be. And Scarlett, your parents love you, not because of your grades or your achievements, but because you're their daughter in every way that matters." The conversation marked a turning point, but the road to healing was far from smooth. Scarlett began seeing a therapist to work through her feelings of displacement and inadequacy, while Isabella continued to navigate the complex dynamics of having two families who both loved her and needed her in different ways. The breakthrough moment came during a family crisis that forced everyone to set aside their personal drama. Richard Montgomery suffered a heart attack during a board meeting, and while he was rushed to the hospital, both families found themselves in the waiting room together. Margaret was beside herself with worry. Carmen was trying to comfort her despite their complicated relationship, and both Isabella and Scarlett were terrified of losing the man who had shaped their lives in different but equally profound ways. It was Scarlett who surprised everyone by taking charge during the crisis. Her years of watching her father conduct business had given her insights that proved invaluable when the hospital needed immediate decisions about his care. She coordinated with his doctors, contacted his business partners to handle urgent matters, and demonstrated a competence and maturity that had been hidden beneath her earlier behavior. Isabella watched with admiration as Scarlett handled the situation with grace under pressure. "She's stronger than she knows," Isabella told Margaret quietly. "She just needed a chance to prove it to herself." When Richard woke up 3 days later, he found both girls by his bedside, not competing for his attention, but working together to ensure he had everything he needed for his recovery. The experience changed the dynamic between all of them fundamentally. Scarlett realized that she had been so focused on what she had lost that she had failed to appreciate what she still had: parents who loved her unconditionally, opportunities that many people could only dream of, and the chance to define herself on her own terms rather than living up to expectations that may have never been real in the first place. Isabella, meanwhile, came to understand that family is not an either-or proposition. She could love and be loyal to the Torres family who had raised her while also embracing her connection to the Montgomerys. The families began to blend in unexpected ways, with Carmen Torres and Margaret Montgomery finding common ground in their shared love for both girls, and Richard discovering that having two daughters was not a complication but a gift. The resolution came not through dramatic gestures or grand revelations, but through the gradual building of authentic relationships based on choice rather than obligation. Scarlett decided to take a gap year before college to work at a nonprofit organization, using her privileged background to advocate for families in situations similar to Isabella's upbringing. The work gave her a sense of purpose she had never experienced and helped her understand that her true inheritance was not money or status, but the opportunity to make a positive difference in the world. Isabella accepted a scholarship to a prestigious university that Richard arranged, but she also continued working part-time and sent money home to help her mother reduce her work hours at the diner. She maintained her relationship with both families, spending time with the Montgomerys while never forgetting the values instilled by the Torres family. The most powerful moment came during Isabella's college graduation, when both families sat together in the audience, cheering for her as she walked across the stage. Scarlett, who had driven down from the city where she was working, felt nothing but pride as she watched the sister she had chosen rather than the sister she had been given by genetics. In her valedictorian speech, Isabella spoke about the definition of family and belonging. "I used to think that identity was something that happened to you," she said, her voice carrying across the auditorium. "But I've learned that identity is something you choose. You choose how to respond to circumstances beyond your control. You choose what values to embrace and what kind of person to become. You choose who to love and who to forgive, including yourself." As Isabella continued her speech, she looked out at the audience and found the faces of everyone who had shaped her journey. Family is not just the people who share your DNA or the people who raised you. Family is the people who choose to love you through your worst moments and celebrate with you during your best ones. Family is the people who challenge you to grow and support you when you stumble. By that definition, I am the luckiest person alive, because I have been chosen by not one family, but by many people who decided that I was worth loving. Carmen Torres wiped tears from her eyes, remembering the scared young woman who had brought her baby home from the hospital 18 years earlier, never knowing that she was embarking on the most important relationship of her life. Margaret Montgomery thought about the daughter she had gained and the daughter she had nearly lost, and felt grateful for the painful journey that had ultimately made their family stronger and more authentic. Scarlett, who had initially felt replaced by Isabella, now understood that love is not a finite resource that gets divided among recipients, but something that multiplies when shared freely. She had not lost her place in the Montgomery family by gaining a sister. She had expanded her capacity for connection and meaning. The girl who had once been consumed by jealousy and resentment had become a young woman who understood that her worth was not determined by comparison to others but by her own choices and actions. Richard Montgomery, watching both of his daughters from the audience, felt a peace he had not experienced since the day he learned about the hospital mistake. He had spent months trying to figure out how to divide his love, his legacy, and his attention between two daughters, only to discover that the answer was not division but multiplication. The story that began with a tired nurse's moment of inattention in a hospital nursery had become a testament to the power of choice over circumstance. Patricia Kellerman's mistake had set in motion events that caused pain and confusion, but it had also created opportunities for growth, forgiveness, and a deeper understanding of what it means to belong. The two families who had been brought together by tragedy had chosen to become something stronger than the sum of their parts. They had learned that love is not diminished by being shared widely, but rather becomes more powerful when it embraces complexity and contradiction. Years later, when Scarlett and Isabella would tell this story to their own children, they would focus not on the hospital mistake that started it all, but on the choices that each person made in response to circumstances beyond their control. They would talk about Carmen Torres, who chose to love Isabella fiercely despite fearing she might lose her to a wealthier family. They would remember Margaret Montgomery, who opened her heart to a daughter she had never raised while fighting for the daughter she had always known. They would honor Richard Montgomery, who learned that being a father was not about biology but about showing up with love and guidance whenever it was needed. And they would celebrate their own journey from rivals to sisters, a transformation that required both of them to let go of their preconceived notions about identity, family, and belonging. The message that resonated through their story was ultimately about the power of love to transcend circumstances and the importance of choosing connection over competition. In a world that often emphasizes scarcity and division, their families had demonstrated that abundance and unity are possible when people are willing to expand their definition of family and belonging. The hospital mistake that had seemed like a tragedy had become the foundation for a deeper understanding of what it means to love unconditionally and to choose family not just based on genetics or convenience, but based on commitment, understanding, and shared values. Their story proved that sometimes the most beautiful families are not the ones that come together naturally, but the ones that choose to come together despite the obstacles, creating something stronger and more meaningful than what any of them could have achieved alone.